The wagon slowed, its wheels crunching through the crusted snow. And then it stopped. The only sounds were the bitter wind whistling down from the Wind River peaks and the heavy, snorting breath of the horses. Mara felt the man's hands on her. They were rough, grabbing the thin calico of her dress. She tried to cry out, but her throat was too raw, her body too broken to resist. She was hauled over the side of the wagon bed like a sack of feed. She landed hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs. She felt a sharp, cutting pain in her ribs, but it was distant, muffled by the layers of cold and shock. She lay in the snowdrift, a discarded thing. Her feet, bare and split, registered the cold as a deep, burning agony before registering nothing at all. Above her, the man grunted. "That's it, then. Debt paid." Another voice, higher and meaner, laughed. "He'll find her come spring thaw. Maybe, if the wolves don't." She felt a sharp prick at her breast, through the fabric. A moment later, the wagon lurched. The crack of a whip split the air, and the sound of the wheels receded, grinding away, leaving her to the overwhelming, frozen silence of the high country. She was unconscious before the sounds faded completely, the world narrowing to a pinprick of gray light, then vanishing into black. Jonas Redfern tracked the deer for 2 hours, moving through the lodgepole pines with a silence born of long practice. He was a broad man, built of the mountains he lived in, and his face was hidden behind a thick, untrimmed beard graying at the edges. He moved with a hunter's economy, wasting no motion, his eyes scanning the snow. The deer was wounded, leaving a sparse trail of crimson on the white. And Jonas was patient. He needed the meat. The winter had been long and hard, and his supplies were running low. He stopped, lifting his head. The wind carried a sound that did not belong, the faint jingle of harness and the complaint of an axle. Far off, down toward the pass. He frowned. Visitors were rare and almost never welcome. He waited, motionless, for 5 minutes, until the sound was gone. He continued his track, but the disturbance bothered him. He found the deer's trail again, but crossing it was a fresher sign. Wagon ruts, deep and heavy, cutting south where no road existed. They had passed less than an hour ago. Curiosity, an emotion he usually suppressed, pulled at him. He followed the tracks, his rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm. He told himself he was just ensuring they were gone, that no one was settling too close to his territory. He saw the patch of color first, a dirty blue against the white drift where the wagon had stopped. It was a disturbance in the snow, a messy hollow. He approached with caution, his eyes scanning the tree line for ambush. Then he saw her. She was half buried, her dark hair fanned out against the snow like spilled ink. She was shoeless. Her face was a mass of bruises, one eye swollen completely shut, her lips split and blue. Jonas stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the sky. It was heavy with more snow. He looked back at the woman. He felt nothing, or rather, he felt the familiar, dull ache of annoyance. This was a problem. This was the outside world, bleeding its misery into his. He stepped closer. She was breathing, barely. A shallow, rattling puff of vapor left her lips and was instantly torn away by the wind. He debated. He could walk away. He had walked away from everything else. It was the law of the mountains. The weak, the unprepared. They were taken by the cold. It was clean. Leaving her would be a kindness, ending the suffering the men in the wagon had clearly started. He saw the glint of metal on her dress. He knelt, his knees cracking in the cold, and brushed the snow away. It was a steel pin, the kind used for invoices, jammed through the fabric and into the skin beneath. A folded piece of paper was attached. He pulled it free, staining his glove with a single drop of her blood. He unfolded it. The handwriting was rough, barely literate. "Take her! She's your debt now!" Jonas stared at the words. He did not know the men. He had no debts in the world below. This was a mistake, or a cruelty so random it defied reason. He looked at her face again. She was young, maybe 20, though it was hard to tell. He sighed. The sound was huge in the silence. It was the sound of a man whose defenses had just been breached. He could not leave her, not because he was good, but because leaving her to the wolves felt like an act of alignment with the men in the wagon. And he hated the world of men. He cursed, a low rumble in his chest. He turned his back on the deer trail. Survival could wait. He slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, one behind her back. She weighed almost nothing. She moaned, a thin, animal sound, as he lifted her. Her head lolled against his chest. He adjusted his grip, pulling the hide blanket from his pack and wrapping it awkwardly around her before starting the long, slow walk back to his cabin, his tracks filling with new snow behind them. He laid her on his own cot, not bothering to light the main lantern. The fire in the hearth was enough. For the first few hours, he worked with a detached, practical anger. He cut the frozen, filthy dress from her body with his skinning knife, the blade moving with practiced precision. The full extent of the damage was laid bare. She was a map of old and new cruelties. Yellowing bruises overlapped with the violent purple marks of fresh blows. Her ribs were misshapen. He suspected at least 2 were broken, but it was her feet that were the worst. They were waxy, white, and frozen solid. He went outside and came back with 2 buckets of snow. He sat on the floor, laid her legs across his lap, and began rubbing her feet and ankles with the snow, working firmly, bringing the agonizing, stinging life back into the tissue. She woke. Then, she did not open her eyes, but she screamed. It was not a full-throated sound, but a choked, terrified shriek that ripped out of her. She began to fight, thrashing on the cot, her hands coming up to claw at him, though she had no strength. "Hold still," he commanded, his voice a gravelly rumble. The sound of his voice only made her panic worse. She bucked, trying to curl into a ball, whimpering. "Woman, be still. I'm not hurting you." She flinched so violently at his words that she almost fell off the cot. Jonas stopped. He recognized the terror. It was the terror of a trapped animal, one that expects the boot or the club. He backed away, raising his hands slowly. "Easy." She subsided, her eyes remaining squeezed shut, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. She was burning with fever. He changed his approach. He moved with deliberate slowness, letting the floorboards creak under his weight so she could track him. He went to the hearth, stoked the fire, and hung a kettle of water. He tore strips from a clean linen sheet, one of his few luxuries. He returned to her. She flinched again when he touched her feet, but she was weaker now. He wrapped them loosely, his large, scarred hands surprisingly gentle. He covered her with 2 heavy fur pelts. For 3 days, she drifted in a delirium. Jonas sat in his chair across the small, 1-room cabin, cleaning his rifle, oiling his traps, sharpening his knives. He rarely slept. He listened to her mutter. The words were disjointed, fearful. "No, Silas, please. I didn't mean to. I'll be good. I promise." He forced broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow. He washed her face with a warm cloth. She fought him every time, her hands flapping weakly against his chest. He learned to pin her wrists with one hand, gently but firmly, while he held the cup to her mouth with the other. "Drink," he would say, and she, in her fever, would obey the command, before lapsing back into her haunted sleep. He ensured she was warm. He ensured she was clean. He ensured the cabin was safe, but he offered no comfort. He did not know how. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Mara woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. She was warm. This was the first, most confusing fact. She had not been truly warm in months. She opened her good eye. The light in the cabin was dim, filtered through a single, greased paper window. She saw a rough-hewn table, a stone hearth, and shelves packed with jars and supplies. And she saw him. He was sitting at the table, his back to her, cleaning a rifle. He was a very large man. His shoulders strained the fabric of his flannel shirt. Fear, cold and immediate, flooded her system. She knew this script. She had been passed from one man to another. This was the new one. The silence was just the prelude to the demand. She tried to sit up, to brace herself, but a sharp pain lanced through her ribs, and she fell back with a gasp. The man stopped his work. He did not turn around. "You're awake," he said. It was not a question. Mara said nothing. To speak was to invite correction. To be quiet was to be invisible. Sometimes. He laid the rifle components neatly on the table. He stood, and she flinched, pulling the heavy fur up to her chin. He turned. His face was hard, carved from the same rock as the mountains. His beard was thick, his eyes deep-set and gray. He looked at her, not with hunger or anger, but with a flat, assessing gaze, the way he might look at a stalled ox. He walked to the hearth, ladled something from a black pot into a wooden bowl. He brought it to her, placing it on a small stool beside the cot. It was stew, thick with meat and root vegetables. Mara stared at it. He returned to his table, picked up his rifle, and resumed his cleaning. He did not look at her again. Minutes passed. The stew steamed. Her stomach cramped with a hunger so profound it was painful. She waited. He said nothing. He did not tell her to eat. He did not tell her not to. Slowly, her hand trembling, she reached for the bowl. She pulled it under the cover of the furs and began to eat, scooping the stew with her fingers. She ate like a wolf, fast and desperate, stopping only to breathe, her eyes fixed on his broad back. She expected him to turn, to laugh at her, to strike her for being an animal. He just kept cleaning his gun. When she was done, she licked the bowl clean, the shame burning her cheeks. She set it back on the stool. This became their routine. He would wake before dawn, go out and check his traps. He would return, and she would pretend to be asleep. He would cook. He would leave food for her. He would go out again to chop wood or hunt. He never spoke. He never touched her. He moved around her as if she were a piece of furniture he had not yet decided what to do with. She expected the violence. Every time he entered the cabin, his large frame filling the doorway, she would tense, her muscles knotting, preparing for the blow. The demand, it never came. He offered only this gruff, impenetrable silence, good food, and the warmth of his fire. After a week, she could stand. Her feet were wrapped in clean bandages, the frostbite receding to a deep, aching throb. Her ribs still pained her. She was weak, dizzy, but she was alive. And she knew she could not stay. This man, Jonas, he was feeding her, healing her. The debt was growing. She knew with certainty how men collected debts. She would rather face the cold. One night, she waited until his breathing deepened into the slow, heavy rhythm of sleep. He slept in his chair by the fire, a blanket thrown over him, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. Quietly, so quietly she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Mara slipped off the cot. The floorboards were freezing. She grabbed the hide blanket he had wrapped her in, the one from the snow. It was her only possession. She found a pair of his old moccasins, stuffed with wool, that he had left near the door. They were far too large, but they were a covering. She did not allow herself to think. She just moved. She lifted the latch on the heavy wooden door. It made a small, metallic click. She froze. He did not stir. She eased the door open. The cold hit her instantly. A physical slap in the face. It stole her breath. The world outside was shades of blue and black, the snow deep, the moon hidden. She stepped out, and she fell. Her legs had no strength. They buckled as if her bones had turned to water. She landed on her hands and knees in the snowdrift beside the door. The weakness was terrifying. It was a betrayal. She tried to rise, but she was shaking too hard. The cabin door opened wider. His silhouette blocked the light from the hearth. She braced for the kick. She curled in on herself. protecting her head, her ribs screaming. "Get up," he said. She couldn't. She was crying, silent, hot tears freezing on her face. "I can't." He was silent for a long moment. She heard him sigh, the same sound of profound annoyance she had heard when he found her. He reached down. She flinched, but his grip was sure. He lifted her again, as easily as he had the first time. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut with his heel, and deposited her back on the cot. He threw another log on the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. He did not look at her. He stood by the fire, his back to her. "The cold will kill you in 5 minutes," he said, his voice flat. "The wolves will have you before that. If you're going to run, at least wait for the spring." He went back to his chair, adjusted his blanket, and closed his eyes. Mara lay there, shivering, wrapped in the cold, damp blanket. She was consumed by a shame so total it eclipsed her fear. She had failed. She was trapped. The next morning, Jonas rose and left the cabin. When he returned, he was carrying several lengths of cured hide and 2 rough-hewn pine boards. Mara watched him, her fear returning. He was building something. He worked all day. He did not eat. He just worked. The sound of his saw and the light tapping of his hammer filled the small room. He paid her no mind, but he was aware of her watching him. By evening, he was done. He had built a divider, using the boards as a frame. He had stretched the thick, dark hides, creating a solid wall that sectioned off the corner of the cabin where her cot was. It created a small, private space, barely big enough for the bed and the stool, but it was hers. It had its own entrance. He stepped back, examining his work. "That'll give you privacy," he grunted, and went to the hearth to tend the fire. Mara stared at the partition. He had built her a wall, not to keep her in, but to keep himself out. He was giving her space. They barely spoke. The silence in the cabin was thicker now, charged with a new, confusing tension. It was no longer the silence of a man ignoring an object. It was the silence of 2 people acutely aware of each other. She heard him breathe on the other side of the new wall. She heard him mending his gear, the scrape of his knife on wood, the grunt he made when he lifted the heavy wood box. He heard her, too. He heard her hesitant movements. He heard the small hitch in her breath when he passed the opening to her section. The tension was hesitant, confused. It hummed in the air between them, a quiet, intense thing that neither of them knew how to name. Mara spent her days behind the hide wall, safe in the near darkness. The lack of violence, the absence of demands. It left a vacuum, and the memories rushed in to fill it. She remembered her father's farm. She was 17. He was a hard man, his hands like leather straps. He had debts. Silas Cade had come to collect. He was an older man, with eyes that stripped her bare and a wet mouth that smiled. Her father had not sold a cow. He had sold her. "She's a good worker," her father had said, not looking at her. "Strong, and she's quiet. That's worth at least the 100 you're owed." Silas had looked at her budding chest, at her long hair. "I'll take her." The marriage was a lie, performed by a drunk preacher in a tavern for $1. That night, Silas had taught her what a husband was. He had been quick, brutal, and angry. He'd hit her when she cried. He taught her other things. He taught her that speaking her mind earned a slap. He taught her that looking a man in the eye was an invitation. He taught her that she was property, to be used as he saw fit, when he tired of her, or when the gambling debts piled up. He found other uses. He loaned her to his friends. He trafficked her to men in mining camps. She remembered sitting in a filthy tent, watching Silas play cards. He'd lost everything. He threw his chips in. "I'm light," he'd snarled. He'd looked at her. "But I've got one more thing of value." She never learned to read. She'd once picked up a newspaper, curious about the shapes. Silas had backhanded her so hard she fell. "You don't need to read," he'd spat. "You just need to know how to be quiet and earn your keep." She was quiet now. She had not spoken a word in days. On the other side of the wall, Jonas sat, sharpening his axe. He heard her stir, a small, restless sound. Her presence grated on him. It disturbed the careful, hollow peace he had built. He had exiled himself here for a reason. He had run from the world, from the rage that lived inside him. He, too, had memories. He remembered Elspeth, her laughter, the way she'd braid her hair, the color of wheat. He'd built their first cabin with his own hands, a smaller, warmer place. He had loved her with a force that terrified him. Then came the birth. It was winter, like this. A blizzard had raged for 2 days, blocking the midwife. He had done it himself, his hands, so used to skinning beasts and felling trees, clumsy and slick with her blood. The baby, a boy, had come out blue and silent, a perfect, still thing. Elspeth had bled. He tried to stop it, packing her with linen, pressing down. But the blood just kept coming. She died before morning, her hand in his, her eyes confused. He had sat there for a full day, holding his dead wife and his dead son. The rage came later. In town, he was drunk, trying to buy a coffin, and 2 miners at the bar had made a joke, something about him having bad luck with his stock. He didn't remember pulling the knife. He just remembered the red on the sawdust floor, the screaming, and the weight of 2 dead men at his feet. The sheriff, a good man, had known Elspeth. He'd looked at Jonas, at the bodies, and at the raw grief in the mountain man's eyes. "There's nothing for you here but a rope." "Jonas," he'd said, "get and don't come back." He had walked into the Wind River Range and had not looked back for 10 years. He had built this new cabin, this fortress of solitude, to keep the world out, and to keep the animal inside him caged. Now, a woman was sleeping on the other side of a hide wall, a woman who looked at him with the same terror as the miners had, just before he'd cut them. The next morning, the storm had passed. The cabin was bright with reflected light. Mara felt stronger. The ache in her ribs was dull, and she could walk on her bandaged feet without dizziness. She stepped out from behind the divider. He was there, at the table, drinking coffee. He looked up. His face was unreadable. She stood there, her hands clasped, wearing his old woolen shirt that hung on her like a dress, and mended trousers she had found folded on the stool. She had to say something. She had to know. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "What do you want from me?" Jonas looked at her. He saw her terror. He saw her brace herself for the answer, and it broke something in his defenses, a small crack in the ice. He looked down at his coffee cup. He spoke, his voice rough. "You don't owe me anything." Mara stared at him, uncomprehending. He lifted his gaze to meet hers. "I'm not Silas. I'm not your father. I'm just a man who found you in the snow." He motioned to the pot on the hearth. "Eat, rest, get your strength." He stood, pulling on his heavy coat. He paused at the door. "Stay or go, that's up to you." He left. Mara stood by the table, listening to the sound of his footsteps crunching in the snow until they faded. She looked at the divider, at the stew pot, at the empty chair he had just left. Up to you. It was the first choice she had ever been given. She did not know what to do with it. She walked to the table, her legs shaking, and poured herself a cup of his coffee. His words hung in the air long after he had left. "Stay or go, that's up to you." Mara had stayed. She did not know how to go. The world outside his door was a white expanse of death, ruled by men like Silas. The world inside his door was a quiet, confusing puzzle, ruled by a man who spoke in riddles of choice and offered food without demand. She chose the puzzle. She began to move outside the confines of the hide divider. At first, she only swept the floor, using a rough broom of bundled twigs. It was a familiar, mindless task, a penance for the space she occupied. Jonas said nothing. He would return from his trap lines, nod at the clean floor, and sit by the fire to clean his rifle, the silence between them as thick as the furs on the cot. Then, 2 days after he gave her the choice, the wind changed. It came down from the peaks with a high, thin scream. The sky turned a dark, bruised gray, and the snow began. It did not stop for 6 days. The cabin, which had seemed a small but solid refuge, became a world unto itself, shrinking with every hour the blizzard raged. The wind clawed at the chinking between the logs and howled in the chimney. Snow piled in drifts that buried the single window, plunging the room into a perpetual, dim twilight, lit only by the hearth fire. They were trapped. The proximity was absolute. Jonah's presence filled the small room. He was a mountain of quiet energy, oiling his traps, checking his ammunition, carving a new handle for his axe. Mara felt herself shrink. She retreated to her corner, mending her own ruined clothes with a needle and thread she'd found in his supply box. The stitching was clumsy, her fingers stiff. But the silence of the storm was different. It was an active, oppressive thing that pushed them together. After 2 days of existing as ghosts orbiting the same fire, Jonas spoke. He was cutting chunks of dried venison. He pushed a handful toward her, along with a small, sharp knife. "You eat. You should work." Mara flinched at the word work. Work had always meant one thing. He seemed to read her mind. He motioned to a crate of winter turnips and potatoes in the corner. "Chop these, for the stew." She stared at the knife, then at him. He had already turned back to the fire. It was an order, but it was a simple, domestic one. She picked up the knife. Her hands trembled. She had not been trusted with a blade in years. She began to chop. The rhythmic thud of the knife against the wooden board was a new sound in the cabin. She focused on it, on making the pieces even, on proving she was not useless. He was adding flour to a pot, making a rough bread. They worked in tandem, a strange, unspoken partnership. The next day, the storm quieted to a steady, heavy fall. "The snares won't last," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "The rabbits will be buried in... Come." Fear seized her. "Outside?" "You need to learn." He tossed her a pair of fur-lined mittens. "If you stay, you'll learn to live. I won't carry you." The words were hard, but the meaning was practical. He was offering her survival. She bundled herself in the spare clothes, her feet aching in the oversized moccasins, and followed him out. The cold was shocking. It was a pure, clean violence, so different from the humankind she knew. The snow was waist-deep, a fresh, unmarked world. He moved through it on his wide snowshoes, and she struggled behind him, falling and rising, her breath pluming. He showed her how to find the game trails, how to see the subtle signs of life beneath the snow. He showed her how to set a wire snare, his scarred, gloved hands moving with an expertise that was almost delicate. "You check them," he said, his voice muffled by the falling snow. "Every day. You don't let them suffer. You take what you need, and you are quick about it." He gave her a snare wire. "Do it." Her fingers, even in the mittens, were numb. She fumbled with the wire, her movements clumsy. She dropped it. Shame burned her face. She expected a cuff, a curse. Jonas knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. He just picked up the wire and demonstrated again. Slowly. "Like this, the loop must be clean, so it's fast." She tried again and again. On the 4th try, the loop held, a tiny, perfect circle of brass wire against the snow. She looked at it, then at him. He grunted. It was the closest he'd come to praise. "Good enough. Let's go back." On the walk back, she felt a strange, aching pride. It was a small thing, a loop of wire, but it was the first thing she had learned that was not based on fear. That night, the storm had passed, leaving the world in a profound, frozen stillness. The cabin was warm. The stew she had helped cut vegetables for was thick and rich. They ate in their usual silence. Mara found herself watching him. He was no longer just a large, frightening shape. He was the man who had shown her how to set a snare, who had not raised his voice when she failed. She had been cleaning, wiping the grime from the cabin's lone bucket of water. She paused, catching her own reflection. It was the first time she had truly looked at herself. Her face was still bruised, the yellows and purples fading. Her hair was lank and dark, but her eyes were clearer. She thought of what Silas had called her, his wife, his property. She thought of the men he'd forced her on, what they demanded of her in the name of wifely duty. She looked at Jonas sitting by the fire, his hands busy mending a strap. He demanded nothing. He had given her privacy, food, and knowledge. The confusion in her was so thick, it came out as a whisper. "I don't know how to be a wife." The words were barely audible, spoken to her own broken reflection in the water. Jonas stopped his work. The scrape of his knife on the leather ceased. The silence that fell was heavy, expectant. He had heard her. He turned his head, his gray eyes finding hers in the dim light. He looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, but with a deep, knowing sadness. He understood what she was not saying. She wasn't talking about cooking stew or mending clothes. She was talking about the cot, about the debt. His voice, when he spoke, was impossibly gentle. It was a voice he had not used in a decade, a voice he had buried with his wife. "Then let me teach you how to be loved." Mara's breath hitched. She stared at him. He had misunderstood. He must have misunderstood. This was the trick. This was the prelude to the demand, wrapped in a soft word. But his face was open, unguarded. He was not moving toward her. He was not smiling. He was making a simple, factual statement, as if offering to teach her how to read a map. The word loved broke inside her. It was a foreign sound, a concept she associated only with pain, with being held down, with gritted teeth and silent endurance. His use of it was different. It implied kindness. She broke. It was not the screaming panic of her fever. It was a silent, shattering collapse. The bucket slipped from her hands, water splashing onto the floorboards. She crumpled, folding in on herself, and began to cry. She wept for the girl sold by her father, for the years of abuse, for the baby she had never known, and for the sudden, terrifying hope this man had just ignited with 6 words. It was the first time someone had offered her love without asking for her body in the same breath. Jonas did not move. He did not rush to comfort her. He gave her the one thing she needed, the dignity of her own grief. He sat by the fire, his hands still, and let her weep, guarding the space around her, his silence a shield. That night, the cold returned with a vengeance. The fire, which he had banked high, seemed to offer little heat against the drafts that snaked in. The blizzard had returned, a final, biting blast. Mara lay on her cot, shivering under the pile of furs. She could hear her teeth chattering. From the other side of the cabin, she heard Jonas sigh. He stood. She tensed, pulling the furs tighter. He came to the opening of her alcove. He was just a large shadow against the firelight. "You'll freeze," he said, his voice back to its usual gruffness. "The cold will be in your bones by morning." She said nothing, just shivered. "Move over." The command was absolute. Fear, sharp and acidic, flooded her. This was it. The payment, the lesson in love, was about to begin. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. He stopped. He did not press. He stood there, a dark mass of frustration. "Woman, I am not. I am trying to keep you from dying. Again." He went back to his side of the cabin. She heard him moving, gathering things. He came back. He threw 2 more heavy pelts onto her cot. "It's not enough," he said. "The fire is losing. We share warmth, or you get sick. It's practical." He waited. Mara's mind raced. He had not hurt her. He had given her a choice. He had given her a wall. He had taught her. She was freezing. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but a new, fragile instinct told her to trust the evidence of her own eyes. Slowly, trembling, she shifted to the far side of the cot, pressing herself against the cold logs of the cabin wall. He took it as assent. He did not remove his clothes, only his boots. He lay on top of the covers, a heavy, solid weight that made the small cot groan. Then he slid under the pelts, his back to her. Mara lay perfectly still, rigid with terror. She was in a bed with a man. He was inches away. His warmth radiated across the small space. "Just sleep," he grumbled, his voice already muffled. They lay back to back. The heat coming off his body was immense. A living furnace. It wrapped around her, seeping into her frozen limbs. She could feel the solid line of his spine against hers. She could hear him breathe, a slow, deep rhythm. Minutes passed. He did not move. He did not turn. He did not touch her. Her terror began to fade, replaced by a profound, exhausted confusion. He was just warm. He was a wall of heat, slowly, muscle by muscle. Her body began to unclench. The shivering subsided. Their breath mingled in the dark. Cold air. 2 white plumes rising toward the rafters. They lay in the shared silence. 2 strangers bound by the cold, and for the first time in her adult life, Mara fell asleep next to a man and felt safe. In the weeks that followed, the high country began to thaw. Jonas took her education seriously. He was a patient, if silent, teacher. He taught her to shoot his rifle. The first time, the kick of it knocked her back into the snow, and the sound made her ears ring for an hour. She was terrified of it. "Fear is good," he told her, forcing her to reload. "It means you respect the weapon. Now hold it tight to your shoulder. Squeeze. Don't pull." He put his hand over hers on the stock, steadying her. His touch was firm, impersonal. She squeezed. The rifle bucked, and a distant pine cone exploded. She looked at him, wide-eyed. He nodded. Again. He taught her to ice fish, to sit in silence on the frozen lake, waiting for a twitch on the line. He taught her which plants to dig for as the snow receded. The bitter roots that could be boiled for food, the leaves that could be dried for tea. Most nights, he taught her to read. He used an old, battered Bible, the only book he owned besides his journals. He started with the letters. "A," he said, pointing. She repeated, her voice hesitant. It was agonizing. She felt stupid, clumsy. Her mind, so quick to read a man's mood, to anticipate violence, could not make sense of the black shapes on the page. She would grow frustrated. The shame of her past, of Silas calling her an ignorant animal, rising in her throat. "I can't," she said one night, pushing the book away, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm too ruined. It's too late." Jonas was quiet. He pulled the book back. He tapped the page. "You are not ruined," he said, his voice flat, as if stating the sun would rise. "You are ignorant. Ignorance can be fixed. Ruin is a choice." He pointed again. "Be..." She looked at him, at the certainty in his face. He did not judge her. He simply expected her to learn. She took a breath. "Be..." He never spoke of his feelings. He never repeated his offer to teach her to be loved. But he looked at her differently. When she finally read a whole word, and he watched her, and the grayness in his eyes seemed to lift for a moment. He would watch her when she practiced her letters by the fire, his gaze lingering, no longer assessing, but appreciative. One afternoon, he was gone for hours, checking a distant trap line. The cabin felt empty, too quiet. Mara was cleaning, a task she had taken on as her own. She was organizing the sparse items on his shelf. Behind a stack of tins, she found a small, leather-bound book. It was not the Bible. She knew she shouldn't. It was his, it was private. But the curiosity, this new, bold thing he was nurturing in her, was too strong. She opened it, a journal. The handwriting was neat, precise. The entries were sparse, just observations. Snow, 3 deer, axe handle split. She turned the pages. The dates went back years, 10 years. Then the entries changed. The handwriting was the same, but the words were different. Elspeth, smells like pine. Cutting wood for the cradle. She says a boy. The snow is bad. Midwife can't come. Mara's hand trembled. She read on, her heart pounding. Stillborn, a boy, perfect. He did not cry. She is bleeding. I cannot stop it. Elspeth. The next entry was 2 days later. Buried them, near the aspens. And then, a week after that, town, drunk, 2 men are dead. The sheriff let me go. I am not to come back. Good, there is nothing to come back to. Mara closed the journal, her hands shaking. She sank onto the stool. This was his ruin. This was the grief he carried, a weight far heavier than her own. He was not just a quiet, gruff man. He was a man who had lost everything, a man who had killed, a man who had exiled himself in shame. She understood his silence now. She understood his patience. He was mending her, perhaps to mend himself. She did not put the journal back. When he returned at dusk, his face dark with cold and fatigue, he found it sitting open on the table, open to the page that spoke of Elspeth. He stopped. He looked at the journal, then at her. She was watching him, her face pale, her eyes full of a new, shared sorrow. She did not speak. She just looked at him. I know. He held her gaze for a full minute. Then he walked to the table, slowly closed the book, and put it back on the shelf. He turned to the fire, his back to her. He did not speak of it. He never would. But the wall between them, the last one, had crumbled. The next morning, Mara woke to a strange scraping sound. She came out from behind her divider. Jonas was standing over a bowl of hot water, a straight razor in his hand. He was shaving. She watched, mesmerized. He methodically scraped away the thick, gray-streaked beard that had hidden his face. With each pass, a new man emerged. His jaw was strong, square. His mouth was firm, his chin marked by a faint, white scar. He looked younger. He looked more human. He looked, she thought, profoundly sad. When he was done, he splashed his face with cold water. He met her gaze in the faint light. He didn't need to say anything. It was an act of vulnerability, a shedding of his hermit skin. He had done it for her. That night, Mara cooked. She took the rabbits from the snares she had checked. She used the roots she had gathered. She mixed the flour, as he had shown her. She made a stew, rich and thick, and a loaf of heavy, passable bread. She served him. He took the bowl, his newly bare face serious. He tasted it. He ate the whole bowl. He tore the bread and sopped up the gravy. Mara sat across from him, her hands clasped, watching his throat work as he swallowed. She had never fed a man who was not demanding it. She had never offered food that was not part payment for her keep. He finished. He looked at her. He gave a single, curt nod. Mara beamed. The pride was so sudden and so sharp, it almost made her dizzy. It was a victory. A few nights later, they sat in their new, comfortable silence. He was working on a trap, his large hands forcing a bent piece of steel back into shape. He cursed, a low sound, and pulled his hand back. A sharp edge had sliced his palm. He ignored it, but the blood welled up, dark in the firelight. Mara stood. She went to the supply box and pulled out a strip of clean linen and the small tin of salve. She went to him. He looked up, surprised. As she approached, "Your hand," she said. He held it out, dismissive. "It's nothing." "Let me," she said. Her voice was soft, but for the first time, it was steady. He hesitated. Then he relaxed his hand, palm up. She sat on the stool opposite him. She took his hand. It was huge in her own. The skin was rough as bark, scarred and calloused. This was the hand that had killed 2 men, the hand that had buried a wife, the hand that had pulled her from the snow, the hand that had taught her to hold a rifle. She gently dabbed the blood away. He did not flinch. She spread the salve over the cut. His skin was warm. She traced the line of a long, white scar that ran from his wrist to his knuckle. She touched it, her fingers light. He had been feared for these hands. She had feared them. As she began to wrap the linen, his other hand, the uninjured one, came up and covered hers. He didn't grip, he just held it. His thumb, rough and warm, brushed against her knuckles. It was the first time he had touched her with intent. Not to save her, not to teach her, but just to touch. Mara looked up. His gray eyes were on her, soft in the firelight. He was no longer Jonas the mountain man. He was just a man, scarred and quiet, holding her hand. She did not pull away. She let him hold her, her own small, mended hand lost inside his. The melt began. It was not a gentle thaw, but a noisy, messy breaking. The snow, which had been a clean, silent blanket, turned to gray slush. Water dripped from the eaves of the cabin in a steady, maddening rhythm. The creek, frozen silent for months, began to roar, a low, constant anger. The world was cracking open. So was Mara. The silence that had defined their existence was filled, not just with the sound of running water, but with her voice. It was quiet, hesitant, as if she were learning to use it for the first time. She began to speak of things that had no place in the high, clean world of the mountains. She spoke of the lowland, of the dirt and the grime. They were outside, mending a section of the cabin wall where the winter had worried the chinking loose. Jonas worked, his hands sure. Mara handed him the mixture of clay and dried grass. "My mother," she said, her voice so low he almost missed it. "She loved the sound of water. She said it washed things clean." Jonas grunted, packing the mud into the log gap. "She died of a fever," Mara continued, staring at the gray slush. "It was fast. She was hot, then she was cold, then she was gone. My father, he sold her quilt for drinking money. It was the only pretty thing she had." Jonas stopped his work for a second. He did not look at her. He just listened. Her voice was flat, a simple recitation of facts. "I was afraid of him, always, even before Silas. He never touched me, not like that. But his hands were heavy. He hit hard. I learned that fear first." She looked down at her own hands, mending the bucket. "I think that's why it was so easy to be afraid of all men. It was the only thing I had ever been taught." She fell silent, and, for a long time, the only sound was his trowel scraping and the endless dripping from the roof. Later that week, she spoke again. They were inside. The fire crackled. She was mending one of his shirts, her stitches small and uneven, but determined. Silas, he used to bring men from the saloon." She did not look up from her sewing. The needle stopped. "The first time, I prayed that God would strike me dead, that I would just stop. When it was over, I was so angry. Not at Silas, not at the man. I was angry at God for not listening." She took a breath. Her knuckles were white on the needle. "After a while, I stopped praying for that. I started to pray that one of them would be too rough, that he would hit me wrong, or cut me, or just finish it." She finally looked up, her eyes dark, not with self-pity, but with the hollow truth of it. "I wanted to die, for years. It was the only thing I ever truly wanted, just for it to be over." Jonas sat across from her. He had been cleaning his rifle, but his hands were still now, resting on the stock. He had heard her mutter in her fever dreams, but this cold, waking confession, it landed on him like a physical weight. He looked at his own hands, the ones she had bandaged, the ones that had killed. "After Elspeth," he said, his voice a low rumble. "After I buried her. And the boy." Mara's breath caught. He had never spoken their names. "I went to town. I killed 2 men. They were nothing, just noise, and I killed them for it." He did not look at her. He looked into the fire. "The sheriff, he knew me. He knew her. He told me to run, so I did. I came up here." He turned his gaze from the fire to his hands. I thought I was a poison, that I had a rage in me that would spoil anything I touched. I came up here to be alone, so I couldn't hurt anyone else. I figured I was done, that I would never be needed by anyone, or for anything, ever again." He paused. "I believe that was for the best, that it was safer, for everyone." He looked at her then, his gray eyes clear. "I used to think no one would ever need me again. I was wrong." The words settled between them. She had confessed her wish for death. He had confessed his acceptance of a living one. They were 2 halves of the same solitude. The thaw revealed the earth. Mara, stronger now, her body healed, felt a restlessness she did not understand. She had to do. She took the rifle. Jonas watched her. She had practiced. She was steady. "Going for a walk," she'd said. It was not a question. He nodded. "Wind is from the west. Keep it in your face." She was gone for 2 hours. Jonas found he could not settle. He chopped wood he did not need. He paced the small cabin. He felt the old, familiar grip of loss, the one that came when something good was gone. Then he heard it, the single flat crack of the rifle, echoing off the high peaks. He waited. Another hour passed. She appeared at the tree line. She was not running. She was walking with a steady, proud gait. She was carrying the rifle in one hand. In the other, she held a large snowshoe hare, its fur already turning from winter white to spring brown. She had hunted. She had provided. She walked up to him, her face flushed with the cold air and a fierce, bright pride. She held it up. "I got one," she said, her voice breathless. Jonas looked at the rabbit, then at her. He had seen her terrified, broken, and healing. He had never seen her victorious. It changed the lines of her face. A smile touched his own mouth, a rare thing. "You did," he said. He reached out. He meant to take the rabbit. She thought he was praising her. She leaned in, her face bright and open. He just meant to take the burden. It happened without thought. His hand, reaching for the rabbit, brushed her arm. Her face was close. The smell of pine and cold air was on her. His lips brushed hers. It was soft, it was brief, it was almost accidental. Mara froze. The rabbit fell from her hand into the snow. She pulled back as if she'd been struck. She stared at him, her eyes wide. She was trembling. Jonas raised his hands, confused by his own action. "Mara!" She touched her own lips, her fingers shaking. It was not fear. He saw it then. It was not the terror she'd shown him at first. It was a deep, profound confusion. It was the shock of a 1,000-volt current, an emotion so foreign she could not name it. It was longing. She did not speak. She turned, grabbed the rabbit from the snow, and fled into the cabin, leaving him standing by the woodpile, his own heart hammering against his ribs. That night, the cabin was suffocating. The tension was back, but it was not the old, hesitant awareness. It was a sharp, vibrating thing. They ate the rabbit stew, which she had prepared with fierce, silent efficiency, without a word. Jonas sat in his chair, pretending to read his journal. Mara sat on her stool. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was replaying the moment. The touch. It had not been brutal. It had not been a demand. It had been soft. It had made something deep inside her, something she thought was dead, wake up and ache. She had to know. She had to know if it was real. She stood. Jonas did not look up, but he tensed. She walked to him. She knelt on the floor in front of his chair. "Mara?" he asked, his voice rough. She did not speak. She leaned in, her movements clumsy, desperate. She put her hands on his shoulders and kissed him. It was not soft. It was full of need. A raw, hungry, confused kiss. It was the kiss of a starving woman who had just been handed a piece of bread. For 1 second, Jonas responded, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head. Then, with a low groan, he broke away. He put his hands on her shoulders and gently, firmly, pushed her back. Mara's face crumpled. Rejection, shame. It was the only answer she knew. She was ruined. She was disgusting. She had misread everything. She tried to scramble away. "No," he said, his voice harsh. He held her steady. "Mara, look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his. They were dark, pained. "I want you to be sure," he said, his voice low and intense. "I want you to choose this. Not because you think you owe me for the food or the cabin. Not because you're afraid of what I'll do if you don't." He held her face between his rough, warm hands. "You've spent your whole life doing things out of fear or guilt. There can be none of that in this. Not with me, not with you." He was not rejecting her. He was protecting her. He was protecting the choice he had given her from the very beginning. He was telling her to be certain, to be free. She stared at him, the hot tears of shame cooling, replaced by a slow, dawning understanding. He was giving her honor. She nodded, unable to speak. She pulled away, this time slowly. She went to her side of the divider, and he sat by the fire, his head in his hands, long into the night. Days passed. The awkwardness returned, but it was tinged with a deep, unspoken respect. Mara watched him. He chopped wood. He tracked game. He read his book. He did not pressure her. He did not look at her with hunger or demand. He waited. "And Mara," she thought. She thought about his words. "Choose this." She had never chosen anything. Her father had chosen for her. Silas had chosen for her. Her life had been a series of reactions to the choices of brutal men. Now, she was being offered one. She began to feel not just safe, but strong. She had hunted. She had learned to read a few words. She had a wall. She had a choice. She found him down by the creek. He was crouched on the bank, examining the prints of a deer, his rifle leaning against a log. She stood behind him, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified, but it was a new kind of fear. It was the fear of a person standing on a high cliff, about to jump into clean, deep water. "Jonas," she said. He stood, turning. His face was calm, patient. He was waiting. She had rehearsed the words. They felt clumsy in her mouth. "Will you teach me?" she asked, and her voice shook so hard she had to stop and take a breath. She clenched her fists. "Will you teach me how to be touched without shame?" The sound of the roaring creek filled the silence. Jonas looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face. He was looking for any hint of debt, any shadow of fear. He found none. He found only a raw, trembling, terrible courage. He stepped closer. He did not touch her body. He just took her hand, the one she had clenched into a fist. He gently uncurled her fingers and held it in his. "Only if you tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice as rough as the stones under his feet. "Every step. You tell me to stop, and I stop. That is the promise." She nodded. A single, sharp movement. They walked back to the cabin. It was dusk. The air was cold, but the fire inside was warm. He built up the fire until the small room was bathed in a soft, orange light. He did not go to her cot, behind the divider. He went to his own, the one he had slept in alone for 10 years. He pulled back the heavy fur pelts. He looked at her. It was a question. She walked to him. He kept his promise. Every step. He reached out and, very slowly, touched her face. He brushed the hair back from her temple. His hand was rough, but his touch was light as a moth's wing. "Mara," he whispered. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes. "Don't stop!" He unfastened the buttons on her wool shirt. His fingers were clumsy, shaking slightly. He paused, his hands hovering. She laid her own hand over his, pressing his palm to her heart. She was trembling, but she was not pulling away. It was a ritual. It was a healing. He unwrapped her as if she were a priceless, broken thing he was mending. Every touch was a question. Every movement she made was an answer. He erased the memory of Silas's brutal, hurried hands. He was slow. He was gentle. He was reverent. When they lay together, it was an intensity she had never known. It was not the grinding, painful act of submission. It was a joining, a frantic, desperate, and profoundly gentle collision of two solitudes. It was the first time she had ever been touched with tenderness. Afterward, she lay in the circle of his arms, the heavy furs draped over them, and the sobs came. She wept. She wept quietly, her body shaking, not from the cold, not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming release. It was the breaking of the final dam. Jonas tensed. He mistook her tears for pain, for regret. "I hurt you." "No," she choked out, turning to press her face into his chest. "No." He did not understand, but he knew how to comfort. He held her. He did not speak. He just held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair, his solid presence a wall against the night, and against all the nights that had come before. He held her as the fire died to embers, and he held her as she finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He held her until the first gray light of morning crept through the window. When she woke, she was in his arms. He was awake, watching her. She looked at him. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. In its place was a fragile, exhausted peace. She smiled. It was the first real smile he had ever seen on her face. It was small, hesitant, but it was real. It transformed her. Jonas felt his own heart crack open. He smiled back. In the days that followed, Mara was a different person. She was no longer a shadow. She was a presence. She laughed. It was a rusty sound, but it was beautiful. She was stronger. She moved with a purpose. One afternoon, she was outside, by the south wall of the cabin, where the sun hit strongest. She was scraping at the dark, thawing earth with a stick. Jonas came out, carrying 2 buckets of water from the creek. "What are you doing?" "I'm measuring," she said, not looking up. "The soil is good here. It's dark." "Measuring for what?" She stood and looked at him, her hands on her hips, her face serious. "I want to build a garden. I want to plant things, corn and beans, and potatoes, things that last." It was a declaration. A garden was an act of faith. It was a promise of a future. She met his gaze. "I want to stay, for good." Jonas looked at her, at the strength in her stance, at the determination in her eyes. He looked at the patch of dirt she had claimed. "All right," he said, his voice thick. "We'll need a fence to keep the deer out." A few days later, she was sitting on the cabin step, enjoying the first truly warm sun of the spring. Jonas came and sat beside her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket. He held something out to her. It was a comb. He had carved it from a piece of smooth, pale aspen wood. The teeth were perfectly even, the back curved to fit a woman's hand. It was simple, elegant, and beautiful. Mara took it. It was still warm from his hands. She ran her thumb over the smooth wood. It was not a chain to bind her, or a ring to claim her. It was a comb, something to care for herself, a gift. She looked at him, her eyes bright with tears she would not shed. He didn't need to say the words. She understood. "You belong here." The cabin was no longer a prison of silence. It was a home. Mornings began not with fear, but with the smell of coffee and the solid, warm weight of Jonas at her back. Mara would wake in his arms, in the bed he had built, her head resting on his shoulder. The hide divider, which had once been her fortress, now hung limply against the wall, a relic of a life that felt a lifetime ago. She moved around the small space with a new, quiet confidence. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, the hem brushing her knees. It was too large, worn thin, but it was his, and wearing it felt like a shield. He would sit at the table, his eyes still heavy with sleep, and she would bring him coffee. She would kiss his head, a simple, soft press of her lips to his hair. It was a gesture that was still new, still fragile, but it was real. Sometimes, while he sat mending a trap or sharpening his skinning knives, his focus absolute, she would come up behind him. She would take the leather thong he used to tie back his hair and begin to work, her fingers clumsy, trying to tame the thick, dark mass. "You're braiding it all wrong," he would grumble, his hands not stopping their work. "Then you should not have such difficult hair," she would reply, her voice light, pulling the braid tight. He would huff, but he never stopped her. He let her touch him, let her stand behind him, a position of total trust. Their love was like this, built not on grand declarations, but on small, shared tasks. It was in the bread she baked, in the wood he chopped, in the way he watched her read, his finger tracing the words she stumbled over. It was a language of action, not words. As the spring deepened, their supplies dwindled. The garden she had fenced with him was still just dark, hopeful earth. "We need supplies," Jonas said one morning, looking at the near-empty flour sack. "Salt, flour, and seeds. If you're to have that garden, we need seeds." Mara tensed. This meant the outpost. This meant people. "I have pelts," he continued, pulling a fine stack of beaver and fox from the corner. "They'll fetch a good price, enough for what we need and more." He looked at her. "You'll do the trading." Her stomach went cold. "Me? Jonas, I don't know how." "You know how to judge a pelt," he said, pulling one from the stack. "You've helped me cure them. You know the work. You know its value." He took her hand and ran it over the thick, glossy fur. "Feel that? No gaps. Cured clean. That's worth at least $5, maybe $6. He was teaching her, but it was more than bartering. He was teaching her worth. "Mueller, at the post. He'll try to offer you $3. He'll say the season is late. He'll say the market is down. You'll tell him no. You'll tell him you'll walk to the next post, 20 miles north before you take less than 5. "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can." He met her gaze, his own steady and certain. "You are not asking, Mara. You are trading. Your work," he stressed the word, "has value. Do not let him steal it from you." The journey to the outpost was 10 miles, down from the high country. They walked, Jonas carrying the heavy bundle of pelts, Mara carrying the empty sacks. The world was loud with bird song and the rush of the melt. It was the first time she had been this far from the cabin, the first time they had been in the world together. He pointed out landmarks, the ridge where a bear denned, the high pass he used for summer hunting. Mueller's trading post was a long, low building of sod and raw timber. 4 men sat on the front porch, spitting tobacco and watching them approach. They stopped talking. Mara felt their eyes on her trousers, on her worn shirt, on the way she walked beside Jonas, not behind him. Jonas ignored them. He held the door for her, and she stepped inside. The outpost was dark and smelled of coffee, cured meat, and unwashed men. It was crowded. Several miners were at the bar, and 3 townswomen in clean calico dresses and bonnets were gathered by a bolt of fabric. When Jonas entered, the room went silent. He was a known quantity. Jonas Redfern, the mountain man, the exile, the killer. Then they saw Mara. The whispers started immediately. A low, hissing sound. She could feel their stares, sharp and judgmental. She saw one of the women, Mrs. Davies, the preacher's wife, pull her young daughter closer, as if Mara were a sickness. Mara's hands began to shake. She wanted to run, to hide behind Jonas's broad back. Jonas set the bundle of pelts on the counter. "Muller," he grunted. A thin, weasel-faced man appeared. "Redfern. Been a while." His eyes slid to Mara, lingered, then slid back. "What have you got?" Jonas stepped back, leaving Mara exposed at the counter. He crossed his arms, a silent mountain, watching. It was her turn. We have pelts," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Stronger. Furs, beaver and fox, prime." Muller smirked. He unrolled the bundle, his hands moving quickly, dismissively. "Passable. Season's late, though market's flooded." He pulled one out. "I'll give you $3 apiece for the beaver. 1 for the fox." Mara's stomach turned. It was exactly what Jonas had said. She looked at Jonas. He was watching her. His face was granite, giving her nothing. He would not save her. She had to save herself. She put her hand on the pelt, the one Jonas had told her was worth 5. "No." Muller raised an eyebrow. "No?" "No," Mara said, and this time her voice was firm. The whispers behind her stopped. "The cure is clean. The fur is thick. It's prime winter fur, not spring. It's worth 5. We'll take 5 for the beaver, and 2 for the fox." Muller laughed. 5? Little lady, you don't know." "I know the work," Mara said, her voice cold. She met his eyes. "I know its value. $5. Or we'll take our work 20 miles north." She was bluffing. She had no idea where the next post was, but she said it with the certainty she had heard in Jonas's voice. Muller's smirk faded. He looked at her, then at Jonas, who was still immobile, still watching. He saw the iron in the mountain man, and he saw the new, shocking reflection of it in the woman. He sighed, annoyed. 4, he snapped. 4 for the beaver, and I'm robbing myself." Mara hesitated. Jonas gave a barely perceptible nod. "Done," she said. She managed the rest of the transaction in a daze. She read the list they had made, her letters still clumsy. Flour, salt, coffee, lard, and seeds, corn, bean, and squash. She paid the man, her hands steady as she counted out the coin he had given her. She was packing the sacks when she heard it. The 2 women by the fabric, their backs to her, their heads bent together. They thought they were being quiet. "That's her," one whispered. "The one Redfern found. The one who was, from Silas Cade." "My word," the other replied, her voice dripping with pious horror. "And he just keeps her, living up there, like an animal, like a whore, plain and simple. It's a shame. He used to be a decent man before." The word hit Mara like a fist to the stomach. Whore. The old, filthy shame washed over her, hot and suffocating. She froze, her hand deep in a sack of flour. She was that thing. She was the dirt from the wagon. She could learn to barter. She could wear a shirt. She could hunt. But to them, she was, and always would be, a whore. She felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to drop the sack, to run from the store, to hide in the dark, silent cabin where she was safe. "Mara." Jonas's voice. It was quiet, but it cut through the whispers. She looked at him. He was not looking at the women. He was looking at her. His face was calm. He was waiting. She saw it then. This was the real test. Not the barter. This. She took a slow, deep breath. She pulled her hand from the sack. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. She did not cry. She did not speak. She looked directly at the two women. Their whispers died in their throats, their faces flushing when they were caught. Mara held their gaze for 3 long, silent seconds. She gave them nothing. Not anger, not tears, just a look. Then she turned her back on them. She calmly finished tying the knot on the flour sack. She shouldered it, took the second sack of supplies, and walked out of the trading post, her head high. The walk back to the cabin was silent. Jonas carried the heavier load. Mara kept pace beside him. She did not speak. She just walked, her eyes fixed on the trail, replaying the word over and over. Whore, whore, whore. That night, the cabin was quiet again, but it was the old, strained silence. She cooked supper. They ate. Jonas cleaned his rifle. Mara sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The new, happy piece had been stolen. Jonas watched her. He saw her shoulders slumped, saw the way she wrapped her arms around herself. Finally, she spoke, her voice small, directed at the fire. Are you ashamed of me? Jonas stopped cleaning. What? In the store. What they said. What they call me. She turned to look at him, her eyes dark with a pain he knew too well. They see me as a dirty thing. That word. Am I ashamed to you, Jonas, to be seen with? She feared she had ruined him. Too, that she had pulled him down, stained his name, what was left of it, with her own past. Jonas was quiet for a long time. He set the rifle down. He walked across the small room and knelt in front of her, just as she had knelt before him when she'd first kissed him. He was on her level, forcing her to see him. Ashamed, he said, and the word was a snarl. Mara! He took her hands. When I was in that town, after Elspeth, I was filled with a rage that was like a sickness. I was a wild thing. I was a killer. I've been ashamed of that. I've been ashamed of the drunk I was, of the weakness that let the rage win. I've hidden up here for 10 years. Ashamed. He held her gaze. Today, I watched you walk into that store. I watched you stand up to a thief who has been cheating me for years. I watched you speak, even though you were terrified. And then, his voice went soft. I watched those women. I watched them try to cut you down with their poison. I saw you freeze. I saw you want to run. His thumb brushed her knuckles. And then I saw you stand. I saw you lift your head. You looked them in the eye, and you let them know they had no power over you. You finished your work, and you walked out of that place. You walked out. He leaned in, his eyes fierce. I have never been more proud of anything in my life than I was in that moment. Seeing you walk into that store, and seeing you walk out with your head held high. He shook his head, a small, rough gesture. Do not ever, he said, his voice thick. Let the poison of small people make you doubt your own worth. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Do you hear me? Tears were streaming down her face, but they were not the tears of shame. She nodded, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He held her, his arms a steel band around her, rocking her gently by the light of their fire. The incident at the outpost settled something in Jonas. She was not his patient. She was not his student. She was his partner. She was his. He began to plan. He wanted to marry her. He knew it was what the world demanded, what would give her a name, a protection. But for him, it was simpler. He wanted to bind her to him. He wanted to stand before the wind in the mountains and call her his wife, not in the way Silas had, but in the real way. One night, while she slept, he sat by the fire. He pulled a thick piece of deer antler from his supply box, a piece he had saved for its smoothness. With his sharpest knife, he began to carve. He was not a delicate man, but his hands were sure. He worked for hours, scraping and smoothing, hollowing out the center. He was carving a ring. It was simple, pale as bone, and strong as the mountain. He would ask her. He would wait until her garden, their garden, showed the first green shoots. He would take her to the creek, and he would put this ring on her finger. He held it up to the firelight, a perfect, simple circle. He did not get the chance. A week later, the peace was broken. Mara was by the garden plot, hammering the last post for the fence. Jonas was splitting wood, the steady thwack of his axe the only sound in the clearing. It was a perfect spring afternoon. A new sound, a horse, not Jonas's pack mule, a single rider, coming up the trail fast. Jonas lowered his axe. Mara stood, hammer in hand. The man who rode into the clearing was not a mountain man. He was dressed in a dark suit, coated in dust, a city hat on his head. He rode a fine black horse. He had 2 pistols holstered at his waist. He looked official. He pulled up, his eyes scanning the cabin, the wood pile, and landing on Mara, he smiled, a thin, unpleasant smile. "This the property of Jonas Redfern?" he called out. "Who's asking?" Jonas said, his hand still on the axe. The man dismounted, moving with a fluid, confident motion. He was not a fool. He unbuttoned his coat, his hands near his pistols. "Name's Flint. I'm a bounty hunter, acting on behalf of a client, Silas Cade." The name hit Mara like a bucket of ice water. She staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. Jonas moved, placing himself between her and the man. "He's got no business here." "I'm afraid he does," Flint said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. He snapped it open. "Got a warrant here, signed by a judge in Laramie, for the return of runaway property. A wife, Mara Cade, also lists a charge of theft. $50, cash." "She is not his property," Jonas said, his voice a low growl. The rage he held in check was rising. "That's not what the law says," Flint said, his smile widening. He looked past Jonas to Mara. "She's his wife, legal and proper, and she ran off. He wants her back." His eyes roamed over her, lingering on the trousers. "Though, seeing the state of her, I'm not sure why." "She was sold," Mara cried out, her voice high with panic. "He sold me! He... "Ma'am, I just collect," Flint said, folding the paper. "Now, are you going to come quiet, or do I have to make this messy? I get paid either way, but I'll take a bonus for bringing you back unharmed." "You are not taking her," Jonas said. He let go of the axe. "Jonas, don't," Mara whispered. Flint laughed. "Old man, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here for her. Stand aside." He stepped forward. He went to grab Mara's arm. Jonas moved. It was not a fight. It was an explosion. The 10 years of shame, the buried rage, the fierce, protective love for Mara. It all came out. He was not a man. He was an animal. He hit Flint with a closed fist, a blow that sounded like an axe hitting oak. Flint was fast. He tried to draw his pistol. Jonas was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. The snap of the bone echoed in the clearing. Flint screamed. Jonas hit him again, and the man fell. He raised his boot to stomp on the man's throat, to finish it, to erase the threat. The killer was loose. "Jonas, no!" Mara's voice, it cut through his rage. He stopped, his boot hovering. He was breathing like a bellows, his hands clenched, shaking. Flint, clutching his broken wrist, scrambled backward, his face a mask of terror and agony. He saw the look in Jonas's eyes and knew he was a dead man. "Don't!" Mara yelled again. She ran to Jonas, grabbing his arm. "Don't! Not for him! Don't!" Jonas looked at her, his eyes wild. He looked at the man on the ground, then back at her. Her terror was for him, not for Flint. She was pulling him back. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the red haze clearing. Flint saw his chance. He crawled to his horse, hauled himself into the saddle with his good arm, and kicked the animal into a gallop. He stopped at the tree line. This ain't over, he shrieked, his voice thin with pain. Cade wants her. He'll send more. He's got the law. He'll get her back. You'll hang for this. The hoofbeats faded, leaving a ringing, terrible silence in the clearing. Jonas stood, shaking. The violence had left him sick, weak. He'll be back, Jonas said, his voice hollow. He's right. Silas has money. He has the law. They'll send a posse. They'll take you. He turned to her, his face grim. You have to run, now. Take the pack mule. Take the supplies. Head north into the high passes. I'll stay. I'll slow them down. They'll come for me. I'll lead them south. He was exiling himself again, this time to save her. No. Mara, listen to me, he said, grabbing her arms. This isn't a game. That man has a warrant. They will hang me and they will drag you back to him. You must go. No, she said, her voice quiet, but hard as iron. She pulled away from him and walked into the cabin. Mara, be sensible, he yelled, following her. She ignored him. She went to the small wooden chest where he had stored the clothes he had cut from her body. She pulled out the ragged, filthy, blood-stained blue calico dress, the one she had arrived in, the one with the note still pinned to the fabric. She walked to the hearth and stirred the embers, adding kindling until a bright, hot fire blazed. What are you doing? Jonas demanded. She held the dress in her hands, looking at it. This is who I was, she whispered. This is property. This is a runaway wife. This is a thing to be thrown from a wagon. A debt. She looked at him, her eyes burning bright in the firelight. I am not her anymore. She dropped the dress into the flames. They watched it catch. The filthy fabric blackened, curled, and dissolved into ash. The steel pin clattered onto the hot stones. When it was gone, Mara turned to him. The terrified, broken woman was gone. In her place was a stranger he had helped create, a woman of impossible strength. I am not running, she said. I will not hide in the mountains. I will not be that thing ever again. Then what? Jonas asked, his voice raw. You said he has the law, she said, her hands clenched. Then we go to the law. We go to the town. We go to the sheriff. They won't listen, Mara. They'll listen to the money. They'll listen to the warrant. Then we will make them listen, she said. I will not let Silas Cade, or that bounty hunter, or any man, run me off. This is my home. You are my home. She stepped forward and took his hand. I will not hide. We will face them. Together. Jonas looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her face. She was no longer hiding. She was ready to fight, and he would not let her fight alone. He squeezed her hand. Together. They walked for 2 days. They left the high, clean sanctuary of the mountains and descended into the dusty, judgmental world of men. Mara felt the air thicken with every step, the smell of pine giving way to the smell of a livestock, wood smoke, and the sour scent of the town. It was called Three Forks, a name grander than the place itself. It was one main street, carved from the dirt, lined with a dozen false front buildings, a saloon, a trading post, a livery, and the small, stark office of the sheriff. People stopped to watch them. This was not the furtive, whispering curiosity of the trading post. This was a hard, open stare. Jonas Redfern had returned. He was a legend, a ghost story the town told itself. The man who had killed 2 miners over a spilled drink. The man who had vanished into the Wind River Range 10 years ago. He was walking down their street, a skinning knife on his hip and a carrying axe looped in his belt, his face shaven and hard as granite. And with him was the woman. They saw her trousers, the heavy boots, the way she walked beside him, not behind. The whispers started, a low buzz that followed them. But Mara kept her head high. She had burned her old life. She would not let their stares be a new cage. Jonas did not look left or right. His eyes were fixed on the sheriff's office. He hated this. Every board on the boardwalk, every face, was a reminder of the man he had been, the rage he had succumbed to. He was walking back into his own shame, and he was doing it for her. They reached the office. Jonas pushed the door open, the bell above it jangling weakly. The room was small, hot, and smelled of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. A man sat behind a heavy pine desk, a star pinned to his vest. He was older than Jonas remembered, his mustache entirely gray, his face carved with weary lines. Sheriff Albright. He looked up from his paperwork. His eyes met Jonas's. Recognition was immediate. The sheriff's hand did not move toward his gun, but his whole body went still. "Redfern," he said. The name filled the small room. "Sheriff." Jonas nodded. He did not remove his hat. Albright's gaze shifted to Mara, taking in her appearance, the fading bruises, the iron resolution in her eyes. "I thought we had an understanding." "Jonas," Albright said, leaning back in his chair. 10 years ago, I told you not to come back." "This isn't about me," Jonas said, his voice a low rumble. "This is about her, Mara." Albright sighed. He ran a hand over his face. "I figured you might be coming. Had a bounty hunter ride through yesterday. Man named Flint. His horse was lathered and his wrist was broke clean in two." He looked at Jonas's hands. "Said he had a warrant. Said you assaulted him." "The warrant," Jonas said, "is a lie." "It's a piece of paper." "Jonas," the sheriff countered, his voice tired. "Signed by a judge in Laramie. It says she's the wife of Silas Cade. It says she ran off with $50 of his money. On paper, that's legal, and that's all I meant to care about." "She was sold to him," Jonas said, his voice dropping, the rage simmering just below the surface. "By her father. When she was 17, he beat her. He used her to pay his gambling debts. He trafficked her to minors." The sheriff winced at the word. He knew Silas Cade, or at least knew of him. A man with money, a man who bought drinks for the right people, a man who held sway down in Laramie. "Jonas," Albright said, his voice careful, "you're asking me to make a big move. Silas Cade has influence. He has friends, and you." He did not need to finish. "You are a killer." "You're asking me." Albright continued. "To tear up a legal warrant and make an enemy of a powerful man, all based on your word and hers?" He looked at Mara, his gaze not unkind, but skeptical. "Son, I've known you to kill 2 men, over nothing, 20 feet from where you're standing. Your word doesn't carry much weight in this town." "Then her word should," Jonas snarled, taking a step toward the desk. "Her word is that of a runaway wife. According to this paper, it's his word against hers. That's a civil matter." "It is not," Jonas said, his hand moving to the handle of the axe on his belt. "Jonas, stop!" Albright said, his hand finally dropping to the pistol on his hip. Do not make this the day I have to put you in the ground. I am telling you, as the law, I cannot act. A marriage is a marriage. A father's right to give his daughter away is his right. What happens in that marriage, it's not my business." He looked at Mara again. "A runaway wife is one thing. What you're claiming, trafficking, that is a hell of an accusation. I need evidence. I need more than your story. I need a witness, something more than just you." He shook his head, his face grim. "Without that, my hands are tied. I'll have to hold you, ma'am, for Laramie. I'm sorry." The silence in the room was absolute. Jonas was a coiled spring. The muscles in his jaw knotted. He was going to do it. He was going to kill this man, and they were going to run. "No." Mara spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Both men looked at her. She looked at Jonas, her eyes pleading with him to be still. Then she looked at the sheriff. "He's right. You need more than my word." She turned, walked to the door, and opened it. "Mara!" Jonas shouted, thinking she was fleeing or surrendering. She did not run. She walked out onto the boardwalk and stood on the top step, facing the street. The argument had been loud. A crowd had gathered. Miners from the saloon, merchants, the women from the trading post, Mrs. Davies, the preacher's wife. They were all there, drawn by the presence of Jonas Redfern and the promise of a confrontation. They were a sea of curious, judgmental faces. Mara looked at them, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She was terrified. This was a different kind of wilderness, a different kind of animal. "You want evidence?" she called out. Her voice was thin, shaking, but it carried in the still air. Sheriff Albright and Jonas appeared in the doorway behind her, stunned into silence. "My name is Mara Callahan," she said, her voice growing stronger. The crowd murmured. "I am the woman Silas Cade calls his wife. I am the woman he has a warrant for." She locked eyes with Mrs. Davies. "And I'm the whore you whisper about." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mrs. Davies flushed a deep, mottled red. "You want to know my story?" Mara asked. "You want the evidence?" She did not wait for an answer. She began to speak. She told them everything. She spoke not with anger, but with a cold, clear, terrible honesty. "I was sold," she said, her voice ringing out, "by my father to Silas Cade to pay a gambling debt. I was 17 years old." The crowd went utterly silent. This was more than they had bargained for. He taught me what it meant to be his wife with his fists," she said, her voice wavering, but not breaking. "He taught me that my voice was an offense. He taught me that my body was not my own. It was his, to use and to rent." The silence was profound. Men shuffled their feet. Women looked down, or away, their faces pale. It was too ugly. It was the truth of the world they lived in, a truth no one ever spoke aloud. When his money ran low, or when he lost at cards, he would trade me, she said. He locked me in rooms with men, miners, strangers. He took their money and called it earning my keep. He called me his property. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I was an object. I was a thing. And when he was finally done with me, he had his men drive me into the mountains. They beat me unconscious. They threw me from a wagon, shoeless, in a snowstorm, to die." She looked around the crowd, her gaze landing on each face. "Jonas Redfern found me. He saved me. He brought me back from the dead. He fed me. He taught me. He taught me that I was not a thing. He taught me how to be a person." She turned and pointed a trembling finger at the sheriff. "That is my evidence. That is my testimony. He is not my husband. He is my captor, and I will not go back. I will die on this street before I let him, or any man, put chains on me again." She finished. She stood there, trembling, exposed, having ripped her soul open for them to see. The crowd was frozen. Some men looked away, ashamed. Others looked angry. It was too much. It was filth, aired in the street. "That's," a man muttered. "That's not decent, talking like that." "She's lying," another said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then, a new voice. "She is telling the truth." The crowd parted. A woman stepped forward. She was in her 60s. Her gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face taut. She wore a simple, dark, high-collared dress. Miss Agatha Finch, the retired schoolmarm, for 30 years. She had taught the town's children. She was a woman of unimpeachable character, a pillar of moral authority. "Miss Finch," Sheriff Albright said, stepping onto the boardwalk, his surprise evident. "Sheriff Albright," she said, her voice as crisp and clean as a new sheet of paper. She did not look at Mara. She looked at the crowd and at the sheriff. "I do not know this young woman," Miss Finch said, "but I know Silas Cade." A murmur went through the crowd. 3 years ago," Miss Finch continued, There was a girl at the saloon, Eliza Cobb. She was saving her money. She wanted to go back east, to her family. The crowd was still. They remembered Eliza. Silas Cade claimed she had stolen from him. I saw him, with my own eyes, on this very street, drag her from the saloon by her hair. He pulled a pistol. He said she was his, that he had bought her, and he beat her. Her voice trembled with a decade-old rage. He beat her with his belt, right here, in the dirt. He called her his property, and he dared any man to intervene. No one did. Her eyes found the sheriff. No one. I tried. He put his gun in my face and told me to mind my own business, or he would mind it for me. She looked at the faces in the crowd. Eliza Cobb disappeared 1 week later. Cade said she ran off. I have always believed he murdered her. I have always believed he beat her to death and buried her where no one could find her. She turned, finally, and looked at Mara. Her gaze softened. This man, Silas Cade, is not a husband. He is a monster. He is a trafficker of human flesh. This young woman is telling the truth. The tide had turned. The crowd was no longer a jury. It was a mob. Their anger, which had been directed at Mara, now turned, hot and righteous, toward the absent Silas Cade. The sheriff was stunned. He had his witness. So what? The voice was rough. Drunk. A man named Blevins, a local loafer, stumbled forward from the saloon doors. So what? Cade's a bastard. We all know it. And she's a... Well, she admits it. He grinned, showing broken teeth. She's a whore. He's a bastard. Sounds like they deserved each other. She's been with half the territory. What's one more? The word whore? It was the trigger. Jonas, who had been standing in the doorway, frozen, watching Mara with a look of pure, agonized awe, broke. The 10 years of rage, the shame of the town, the memory of the miners, the fury at Flint, and the all-consuming, protective love for Mara, it detonated. He was not a man. He was a force. He crossed the 6 feet of boardwalk in a single, silent bound. He grabbed Blevins by the throat before the man could even blink. He lifted him, a full 200 pounds, off his feet and slammed him against the thick wooden post of the saloon overhang. The thud of the impact silenced the street. Blevins choked, his eyes bulging, his feet kicking in the air. Jonas pulled his skinning knife. He was snarling, a low, animal sound in his chest. He was going to kill him. He was going to gut him. Right here, in front of the town, in front of the law, in front of her. He was back. The killer was back. Jonas! Mara screamed his name. He didn't hear her. The knife rose. Jonas! No! She ran. She did not try to pull his arm. He was too strong. She launched herself at him and put her hands flat on his chest, on his heart. She stood between him and the man he was about to murder. Jonas! She cried, forcing him to look at her. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed, not seeing her. Look at me, she commanded, her voice breaking. Listen to me. You cannot do this. This is not you. This is the animal they think you are. Don't be that. Not for him, not for me. He was still trembling. The knife pressed so hard against Blevins's throat, it drew a bead of blood. They hurt me, she whispered, her hands clinging to his shirt. I won. Jonas, we won. Don't, please. Don't lose this. Don't lose you. I need you. Don't leave me. I need you. The words cut through the red haze. He looked down. He saw her face. He saw her terror. Not for Blevins, not for herself, but for him, for his soul. He was shaking. The knife was shaking. He looked at the pathetic, choking man, then back at Mara. With a guttural roar, a sound of agony and release, he threw Blevins to the ground. The man landed in a heap in the dust, gasping, coughing, and scrambling backward like a crab walking away in pure terror. Jonas stood there, his chest heaving, the knife still in his hand. He was trembling violently. Mara did not back away. She kept her hands on his chest, her forehead pressed against his shoulder, until she felt his heart slow from a gallop to a slamming, painful beat. She had done it. She had saved him from himself. The street was dead silent. Every person there had just witnessed an execution, and its reprieve. Sheriff Albright, his hand on his gun, slowly let it go. He had seen it all. He had seen the murder in Redfern's eyes, and he had seen the woman who had pulled him back from the edge. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. He put his hat back on. He was the law again. "Well," he said, his voice loud, "you all heard it. You heard Miss Finch. You heard Mrs. Callahan." He gave Mara the name, a gift. He made his decision. This ain't about a runaway wife. This ain't about $50. This is about unlawful imprisonment. This is about trafficking and assault. And, pending what Miss Finch said, it's about the disappearance of Eliza Cobb. He looked directly at Mara, and his gaze was, for the first time, one of pure respect. As of this moment, the warrant for Mara Cade is null and void. He looked at the crowd. She is not property. She is a free citizen of this territory. Ma'am, you are free. He turned to a young deputy cowering in the office doorway. "Get on the telegraph. Send a wire to the marshal in Laramie. Silas Cade is now a wanted man for unlawful imprisonment, trafficking, and pending investigation for murder." The spell was broken. The crowd erupted in talk, in arguments, in noise. It was over. Jonas slowly, his hand still shaking, sheathed his knife. He took Mara's hand. His was slick with sweat. Hers was steady. They did not wait. They did not speak to anyone. He just turned, and she turned with him. They walked, hand in hand, down the center of the street. The crowd parted for them, like water parting for a rock. The people watched them, silent now. They were not watching a killer and a whore. They were watching a man and a woman. They left the town. They left the dust and the judgment and the noise. They started the long, quiet climb back up the mountain trail, toward their home. They walked in silence for nearly an hour. The air grew cleaner, cooler. The sound of the wind in the pines returned. As they rounded the last bend, where the town of Three Forks vanished from view behind the granite cliffs, Mara stopped. Jonas stopped with her, turning to her. "Are you all right?" She was not looking at him. She was looking up, at the vast, clean blue of the Wyoming sky, at the snow-capped peaks of the Wind River Range. She let go of his hand. She took a breath. It was not a normal breath. It was a deep, shuddering, ragged inhalation that filled her lungs to their very bottom. It was the first full breath she had ever taken. A small sound escaped her, half sob, half laugh. She turned to him, her eyes shining, her face scrubbed clean of all its old fear. "I've never felt this light before," she whispered, the words carried away by the wind. "It's like I can finally breathe." The climb back up the mountain was a different journey. When they had left, they were fugitives, walking toward a judgment they did not expect to win. Now, they returned as two free people, walking toward a life they had chosen. The air was cleaner. The sound of the wind in the lodgepole pines was not a howl, but a song. The cabin, when they reached it, was just as they had left it. It was small, dark, and built for one man's solitude. It was no longer enough. They did not rest. They began to rebuild. Jonas took his axe to the woods, felling trees with a strength that was no longer fueled by rage, but by purpose. Mara worked beside him, clearing brush, dragging the smaller logs. They were a team, moving with an unspoken rhythm. He was the brute force. She was the steady hand. They were building a second room, an addition, a space that was not his or hers, but theirs. It took weeks. The sound of the axe, the scrape of the saw, and the thud of the hammer replaced the silence. They worked from sunup to sundown, their bodies aching, their hands raw. They ate their meals sitting on the new, raw-cut logs. Speaking of practical things, where the window should go, how to join the roof, how to best mix the clay for the chinking. And Mara built her garden. She took the seeds she had bartered for at the outpost and turned the dark, rich soil near the cabin's south wall. She built the fence high, as he had suggested, to keep the deer from her work, as she called it. She planted corn and beans and squash. She planted her faith in the earth. Inside, the cabin transformed. The hide divider, the symbol of their separation, was taken down and cured for a new purpose. Jonas, seeing her frustration with the lack of space, built shelves. He was not a fine carpenter, but his work was solid, built to last. He built a small, sturdy table and 2 chairs, so they no longer had to sit on stools like strangers. And he built a small bookshelf. Mara had a ledger book, one Jonas had kept, blank and unused, for logging his traps. She had claimed it, every night, by the fire, after the grueling work of the day. She would sit with it. She had a piece of charcoal, sharpened to a point. She was writing. Her letters, which he had taught her, were still clumsy, the shapes thick and uneven. She had to sound out every word, her lips moving in the silence. It was slow, agonizing work. She was writing her story. Jonas would watch her. He would sit across from her, oiling his rifle or carving a piece of wood, and watch the intense, focused line of her brow. He watched her battle the words, watched her scratch out a mistake, watched her determination. The woman who had been forbidden to read was now writing her own history, claiming it with charcoal and paper. One night, she went to bed before him, exhausted. She left the ledger open on the new table. It was an invitation. He sat in her new chair, his large frame filling it. He pulled the book closer to the firelight. He began to read. He read of her fear when she first woke in his cabin. He read of her confusion, of the cold, of the man she saw as just another captor. He read of the night she tried to run, of the shame when she fell. He read of the divider, of the small kindness of the wall he had built. He read his own words, reflected in her memory. Stay or go, that's up to you. He saw, through her eyes, what he had done. Not just saved her body from the snow, but saved her soul from the world. He read on, his throat tight, until the fire burned down to embers. Spring bled into summer. The high country exploded with life. The snow receded to the highest peaks, revealing meadows of lupine and columbine. The garden she had planted pushed up stubborn, green shoots. Their love deepened. It settled. The desperate, healing passion of their first nights together gave way to a sturdier, quieter thing. It was companionship. It was Mara sitting by the creek, reading her letters aloud to the rushing water, while Jonas fished for trout, his presence a silent, protective wall. It was Jonas coming home from a hunt, weary and blood-streaked, to find her waiting, a hot meal on the hearth, her smile the first thing he saw. It was laughter. It was a new, bright sound in the cabin. Mara had tried to help him cure a deer hide and had fumbled the scraper, sending it flying, coating both of them in tallow and brine. Jonas had stared at her, covered in the mess, and she had looked back, her eyes wide with shock. Then she laughed. It was a full, clear, genuine laugh. He had never heard it. He was so stunned by the beauty of it. He just stood there until he felt his own chest rumble, a low, unused laugh escaping him. It was a shared silence. They could sit by the fire for an A's evening, he mending a boot, she reading her journal, and the silence was not empty. It was full. It was the comfortable, easy quiet of two people who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. One night, the heat of the summer had not yet broken. They took a blanket outside and lay on the ground, side by side, watching the stars. The sky was a spill of diamonds, so clear and close it felt as if they could reach up and touch it. They were quiet for a long time. watching the silver river of the galaxy flow overhead. "I used to pray to them," Mara said, her voice soft, almost lost in the chirp of the crickets. Jonas turned his head. "To the stars?" "To anything," she said. "To God, to the stars, to the moon. When I was with Silas, I prayed for it to end. I prayed for death." She paused. "And when I was on the farm, with my father, I prayed for love. I thought love was a thing you earned. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, if I suffered enough, that one day someone would love me as a reward for being so strong." She turned to look at him, his face a landscape of shadows in the starlight. "I used to think love was something you earned by suffering." Jonas looked at her. He saw the girl who had been sold, the woman who had been beaten, the survivor who had stood in the street and claimed her own life. He reached out, his rough hand tracing the line of her jaw. "Love isn't what you earn," he said, his voice a low rumble, as deep as the mountain. "Love is what heals the suffering." She looked at him, the truth of his words settling over her, a blanket warmer than any fur. He sat up. He had been waiting. He had waited for her to be free, not just from Silas, but from her own past. He had waited for her to understand that she was not a thing to be earned, but a person to be cherished. He reached into the pocket of the trousers he wore. "Mara," he said. He did not know the words. He was not a man of fancy speeches. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Jonas!" He held it out to her, on the palm of his calloused hand. The ring, the one he had carved from the deer antler. It was pale in the moonlight, a perfect, simple, strong circle. She stared at it. "I am not a rich man," he said, his voice rough. "I have no gold. I have only this, what I make, what I am." He looked from the ring to her face. "Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in her eyes, not the tears of pain, or grief, or shame. These were tears of light. They spilled over, catching the starlight. She did not speak. She put her hand over his, over the ring. She nodded, her throat too thick with joy to form a word. He took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It was not cold metal. It was warm, like bone, like life. She accepted. They did not go to a town. They did not find a preacher. Their marriage to the world, the one of laws and paper, had brought them nothing but pain. They needed a different witness. A few days later, they walked down to the river. The water was high, still strong from the last of the melt, roaring over the stones. The wind was moving through the high aspens, their leaves turning, the first hint of gold touching the edges. They stood on a large, flat rock at the water's edge. There was no one for miles, no one but the eagles turning high overhead. Jonas took her hands. They were bare. She was bare. He was her husband. "Before the river," he said, his voice loud, to be heard over the water. "Before this mountain, you are my wife." Mara looked at him. Her Jonas, her protector, her student, her home. "Before the water," she whispered, the words just for him. "Before the wind, you are my husband." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or of healing. It was a kiss of fact. It was a promise sealed, a vow witnessed by the only things they trusted. It was done. Time passed. The green of the garden faded, the corn ripening, the squash heavy on the vine. Autumn came, painting the aspens a brilliant, burning gold. The nights grew cold, and the fire in the hearth was, once again, the center of their home. The new room was finished. The shelves were full. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a home. One evening, a chill wind whistled outside, carrying the sharp promise of the first snow. Mara sat on a stool by the fire, the ledger open in her lap. Jonas sat behind her, on a chair, close, the wooden comb he had carved, now dark with use, was in his hand. He sectioned her hair, his large, scarred fingers surprisingly gentle. He began to braid. "Read," he murmured, his voice close to her ear. She looked down at the page, at her own words. "It is winter," she read, her voice soft but clear. "The cold is a living thing. I'm afraid. I'm in his cabin. He is a large man. He does not speak. He watches me. I think he will hurt me. I wait. The waiting is the worst. He gives me food. He does not touch me. He builds me a wall." Jonas worked the braid, his hands sure, weaving the dark strands together. He leaned down, brushing his lips against the warm skin of her neck, just below her ear. Her voice hitched. She stopped reading. A single tear escaped and fell onto the page, smudging the charcoal. She turned her head, her braided hair falling over her shoulder. She looked at him, at this man who had saved her, this man she had saved. The gruff, bearded stranger was gone. In his place was her husband, his face shaven, his gray eyes soft in the firelight. "You taught me how to be loved," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonas finished the braid, his hand resting on her shoulder. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, breathing her in. "And you," he murmured, his voice a raw, quiet truth. "You taught me how to live again." Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories, and be sure to share your thoughts in English.